On a 1950s road map of Oklahoma alone, you could put your finger on more than a dozen towns where the mayor, the school teacher, and every storefront owner on Main Street was black. Whole towns, built from the ground up, run without asking anyone's permission. Almost none of them are on the map today, and almost nobody watched them go. Number 24 on this list, Taft, was one of more than 50 such towns in Oklahoma Territory alone. Number 2 was talked into existence on the Colorado High Plains by a man named Oliver Toussaint Jackson. And the number 1 spot goes to the Mississippi town, founded by a man who had been enslaved in the household of Jefferson Davis's own brother. Hit subscribe, because these places deserve better than to be forgotten twice. Here are 25 all-black towns from the 1950s, gone before anyone noticed. Number 25. Clearview, Oklahoma. Around the turn of the 20th century, black families staked their claim on Oklahoma Territory land and built a town from bare prairie. Clearview had its own school, its own general store, and a main street where black merchants ran their businesses without answering to anyone. By the 1950s, a few hundred people still called it home. The church anchored the week, and Saturday was for trading at the store. Today, Clearview barely shows up on a census. The storefronts sit empty, but some of the original families still hold the land deeds, and they still come back for homecoming every summer. That is not nostalgia. That is a deed with a name on it. Number 24. Taft, Oklahoma. One of more than 50 all-black towns scattered across the Oklahoma Territory, founded in the early 1900s when black settlers saw a chance to build something entirely their own. Taft had a school, a post office, and a main street where every dollar circulated in the community before it ever left. Families raised children in houses they built with their own hands on land they owned outright. By the 1950s, the younger generation was already leaving for Tulsa and Oklahoma City, chasing factory jobs the small town could not offer. The storefronts closed one by one. A town does not die all at once. It just gets quieter until nobody notices the silence. Number 23. Hobson City, Alabama. Just outside Anniston, Hobson City was incorporated around the turn of the century by black residents who were shut out of the neighboring town's government. So they built their own. They elected their own mayor, maintained their own roads, and ran their own affairs without asking anyone's permission. In the 1950s, it was still a functioning municipality with churches, a school, and families who governed themselves. But the economic base was always thin. When the mills around Anniston started closing, the tax revenue dried up. Roads crumbled. The population thinned to a few hundred. Self-governance does not mean much when there is nothing left to govern. Number 22. Lincoln Heights, Ohio. Just north of Cincinnati, Lincoln Heights incorporated as a village in the 1940s, making it one of the few all-black municipalities in the state. Black families had been settling there since the 1920s, drawn by factory jobs and the chance to own a home without restrictive covenants blocking the door. By the 1950s, Lincoln Heights had its own fire department, its own schools, and a middle-class rhythm that looked nothing like the poverty the outside world assumed. Then the factories relocated. Surrounding communities refused to share services or let Lincoln Heights annex commercial land. The village that once stood for black suburban aspiration became a study in economic isolation. Number 21. Brooklyn, Illinois. Sitting just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, Brooklyn is one of the oldest predominantly black communities in the United States. Black families settled there before the Civil War, and the town was formally incorporated in 1873. By the 1950s, it had its own government, its own churches, and a community that had endured longer than many states in the Union. But survival and prosperity are not the same thing. Industrial jobs left the region. Flooding from the Mississippi plagued the streets year after year. Today, fewer than 1,000 people remain. A town that old, that resilient, and that invisible tells you more about this country than most monuments ever will. More than 50 all-black towns once existed in Oklahoma alone. When Indian Territory opened up to settlement in the late 1800s, Black Americans saw something rare: unclaimed land and no established white power structure to block them out. They came from the Deep South, from sharecropping fields and Jim Crow towns, and they built communities from nothing. Mayors, merchants, teachers, sheriffs, all black. For a brief window, the Oklahoma Territory was the closest thing to black self-determination this country had ever produced. Then statehood came, and with it came white legislatures and economic systems designed to starve those towns of resources. The land stayed, the people left. Number 20. Redbird, Oklahoma. Even by Oklahoma all-black town standards, Redbird was small. A cluster of families on flat prairie land with a one-room schoolhouse, a church, and not much else visible from the road. But the families there owned every acre they worked. In the 1950s, children still walked to that schoolhouse every morning. There was no hospital, no bank, no paved highway leading in. The nearest doctor was a long drive on a dirt road. When the young people left for cities with steady wages, they did not come back. Redbird faded so quietly that most county records barely register it ever existed. Just open land where somebody's grandmother once swept a front porch clean every morning before the sun came up. Number 19. Langston, Oklahoma. Langston was built around an idea as much as around land. Founded in 1890, the town centered on Langston University, established in 1897, one of the westernmost historically black colleges in the country. The university gave the town an economic anchor that did not depend on cotton or weather. By the 1950s, integration opened doors at larger institutions, young people left, and the commercial district lost its shops one by one. Langston University survives today, but the town around it is a fraction of what the founders imagined. Number 18. Kendleton, Texas. Tucked into Fort Bend County southwest of Houston, Kendleton traces its roots to formerly enslaved families who settled the area after the Civil War. By the 1950s, it was a quiet, self-sustaining community where black families farmed, raised livestock, and sent their children to the local school. The town had a general store, a church that doubled as a meeting hall, and the kind of deep-rooted neighborliness that only comes from families who have known each other for 4 generations straight. But Houston sprawled outward. Wealthier communities absorbed the tax dollars and the new roads. Kendleton was left behind, too small to compete for funding, too stubborn to fold, and too invisible for anyone to notice it was disappearing. Number 17. Robbins, Illinois. South of Chicago, Robbins incorporated in the late 1910s and became one of the earliest black-governed municipalities in the northern United States. Black families arrived during the Great Migration and found a place where they could vote, hold office, and own property without a single restriction written against them. By the 1950s, the town had its own fire station, its own police department, and a population that took genuine pride in running its own affairs. But Robbins never had the tax base to support itself. The suburbs around it hoarded the commercial corridors. When factories shuttered across the south side, the bottom fell out. The town that proved black self-governance could work in the north became proof of what happens when the economics are stacked against you from the start. Number 16. Freedmen's Town, Houston. In the 4th Ward of Houston, Texas, formerly enslaved men and women built a neighborhood brick by brick after the Civil War. The residents hand-laid the brick streets themselves in the years following emancipation, and those bricks are still under the asphalt in places today. By the 1950s, Freedmen's Town was a thriving black community with churches, businesses, and a cultural heartbeat that anchored the whole 4th Ward. Then the developers arrived. Block by block, the old houses came down. Churches were demolished. The brick streets were paved over. Freedmanstown was not abandoned by its people. It was taken by a city that valued the land more than the hands that built on it. Number 15. Haiti, Durham, North Carolina. In the first half of the 20th century, Haiti was one of the most prosperous black communities in the entire South. It had its own banks, insurance companies, theaters, and a business district that powered Black Durham's economy for decades. Then the state decided to build a highway. The Durham Freeway sliced through the heart of Haiti in the 1960s, demolishing hundreds of homes and businesses and scattering a community that had taken generations to build. The people who lost their homes received a fraction of what they were worth. The businesses never reopened. Nobody held a vote. Nobody asked the residents whether they wanted a freeway running through their front yards. That is how you erase a neighborhood without ever saying the word. There is a pattern buried in these names, and it is not natural decline. The rural all-black towns faded when jobs dried up and young people followed the wages. That part is economics. But the urban black communities on this list did not fade. They were demolished. Highways were routed through them. Airports expanded over them. In nearly every case, the decision to build through a black neighborhood instead of around it was made by people who did not live there and never asked those who did. The homes that were seized were not empty lots. They were paid-for houses with families inside them. The difference between a ghost town and a demolished neighborhood is simple. One died on its own, and the other was killed on schedule. Number 14. Princeville, North Carolina. Princeville is the first town in the United States chartered by Black Americans, founded in 1885 on the Tar River. By the 1950s, families still worshipped at the same churches their great-grandparents had raised. Then the river came. Upstream development made flooding worse decade by decade. Hurricane Floyd in 1999 submerged nearly the entire town. The federal government offered buyouts, and many residents accepted, because when your house floods twice in a decade, principle loses ground to survival. A few hundred people remain today. The oldest black chartered town in America should have been a national monument. Instead, most Americans have never heard of it. Number 13. Allensworth, California. Colonel Allen Allensworth had been born into slavery, escaped, served in the military, and risen to become one of the highest-ranking black officers of his era. In 1908, he founded a town in California's Central Valley with the belief that Black Americans needed a place entirely free from discrimination. For a few years, Allensworth thrived. It had a school, a library, a church, and farmland that yielded good harvests. But the water supply was never reliable. The railroad reduced its service. The population dwindled through the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. Allensworth is a state historic park today. The buildings still stand, the fields still stretch to the horizon, but the families who were meant to fill them packed up decades ago. Number 12. Rentersville, Oklahoma. Rentersville never had more than a few hundred residents at its peak, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in stubbornness. Founded in the early 1900s, this all-black town in eastern Oklahoma held on longer than most of its counterparts. By the 1950s, families still farmed the surrounding land and gathered at the local church on Sundays. In later decades, the town kept its name circulating through an annual blues festival that drew visitors from beyond the county line. But a festival once a year does not sustain a population. A town that size does not get an obituary in any newspaper. It just gets one last person who remembers what the main street used to look like, and then even that is gone. Number 11. American Beach, Florida. On Amelia Island near the Georgia border, Abraham Lincoln Lewis helped establish American Beach in the 1930s as a vacation spot for black Floridians who were barred from every other stretch of sand in the state. Lewis ran one of the largest black-owned insurance companies in the South, and he used those resources to build a place where black families could swim, eat, and rest without anyone questioning whether they belonged. By the 1950s, American Beach was a summertime destination for families across the Southeast. Then the Civil Rights Act opened every beach to everyone. The economic necessity that had created American Beach vanished overnight. The dunes remain, but the gathering place behind them is mostly gone. Integration gave Black Americans access to every shoreline in the country and quietly took away the one that was built just for them. Number 10. Kinloch, Missouri. Just north of Lambert Airport in St. Louis County, Kinloch was one of the oldest black communities in the state. By the 1950s, it was a working-class suburb with thousands of residents, paved streets, a fire department, and an elected government. The kind of place where a black family could buy a house, plant a garden, and watch their children walk to school without crossing into a town that did not want them there. Then the airport needed more room. Starting in the 1980s, the Lambert expansion project began buying up properties block by block. Hundreds of homes were demolished. Entire streets disappeared under grading equipment. Kinloch's population dropped from thousands to a handful. A town that had stood for close to a century was leveled so planes could take off with fewer complaints from neighbors. Number 9. Tatum's, Oklahoma. Tatum's was one of those Oklahoma towns so small it barely appeared on state maps even when people still lived there. Black families settled the area in the early 1900s and built what they could manage: a church, a schoolhouse, a general store, and enough houses to call it a proper community. By the 1950s, the town was already shrinking. The soil was not the most productive. The nearest city with decent wages was too far for a daily trip. One by one, families packed up and headed for places with more to offer. Tatum's did not suffer a massacre or face a demolition order. It simply ran out of reasons for anyone to stay. Number 8. Eatonville, Florida. Incorporated in 1887, Eatonville is one of the oldest black incorporated municipalities in the United States, and the town where Zora Neale Hurston grew up and found the raw material for her novels. Hurston wrote about the porches, the dirt roads, and the rhythms of a place where black life was the default and not the exception. By the 1950s, Eatonville was still a functioning town, still governed by its own residents. It has not vanished entirely. People still live there. But the Eatonville that Hurston described, the place where a black child could grow up hearing nothing but black voices running the whole conversation, has been swallowed by Orlando's sprawl. The name survived. The world it stood for did not. Number 7. Boley, Oklahoma. Founded around 1903, Boley grew into one of the largest all-black communities in the country. It had 2 banks, a newspaper called the Boley Progress, and a commercial district that Booker T. Washington praised as one of the most impressive examples of black enterprise in the nation. Black families came from across the South, drawn to a place where a black man could own a business and vote in every election. Then the Great Depression hit. The banks closed, young people left for the cities, and by the 1950s, the most famous all-black town in the country was a quiet settlement of a few hundred people. A small rodeo keeps the name alive, but the town that made Washington take notice is a place most people drive through without slowing down. Number 6. Africatown, Alabama. Just north of Mobile, Africatown was built by people whose story has no parallel in American history. In 1860, more than 100 West Africans were smuggled into Alabama on a schooner called the Clotilda, decades after the international slave trade had been outlawed. After emancipation, the survivors pooled their resources, bought land, and built a community that preserved their African customs, language, and governance. By the 1950s, descendants of those settlers still lived there, but industry closed in. Paper mills and chemical plants encircled the community. Pollution fouled the air and water. Highway construction cut through the neighborhood. Younger generations left. Africatown is still inhabited, but the settlement built by the last survivors of the American slave trade has been reduced to a few blocks surrounded by industrial fencing. The Clotilda was found at the bottom of the Mobile River in 2019. The ship survived. The town it created barely did. Number 5. Nicodemus, Kansas. Founded in 1877 by formerly enslaved families from Kentucky, Nicodemus was one of the first all-black settlements west of the Mississippi River. The settlers arrived on the Kansas prairie with almost nothing and built a community out of sod houses and raw determination. By the early 1900s, Nicodemus had a post office, a hotel, a general store, and a population that was growing. Then the Union Pacific Railroad chose a route that bypassed the town entirely. Without a rail connection, the commercial future evaporated. Businesses packed up and moved to the towns that got the stop. By the 1950s, only a handful of families remained. Nicodemus is a National Historic Site today. Rangers give tours. Visitors read the plaques. But the town they built functions as a museum, not a home. A place preserved under glass does not breathe the same way. Number 4. Idlewild, Michigan. For decades, Idlewild was the place to be if you were black and wanted a real vacation. Tucked into the lake country of northern Michigan, the resort community drew thousands of black visitors every summer starting in the 1920s. By the 1950s, Idlewild was at its peak. Hotels, nightclubs, and lakefront cottages filled up every season. Some of the biggest performers in black entertainment played the summer circuit there. Families drove up from Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland to swim, fish, and dance in a place where no signs told them they were not welcome. Then the Civil Rights Act opened every resort in the country, and Idlewild lost the one advantage that had kept it alive: exclusivity born from exclusion. The summer crowds thinned and then vanished. The lake is still there. The pines are still there. But the community that turned a stretch of Michigan forest into Black America's favorite summer destination lives mostly in photo albums now. Number 3. Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The name Greenwood will always mean 1921. A white mob destroyed 35 blocks of the most prosperous black community in the country, killing hundreds and burning everything to the ground. But what gets far less attention is what happened after. The people of Greenwood rebuilt. By the 1940s and 1950s, the district had risen again. Black-owned businesses lined Greenwood Avenue once more. Churches reopened their doors. Then, urban renewal finished what the mob had started. In the 1960s, highway construction carved through Greenwood, displacing the residents and flattening the businesses that survivors had spent 3 decades rebuilding. This time, there were no torches. There were planning commissions and eminent domain notices delivered by mail. The result was the same. Greenwood was destroyed twice. The first time, the country looked away. The second time, the country signed off on it. Number 2. Deerfield, Colorado. Out on the high plains of northeastern Colorado, a man named Oliver Toussaint Jackson convinced black families from Denver to try something most people would have called impossible: farming the open prairie. Starting around 1910, Deerfield grew to several hundred residents with a filling station, a general store, and farmland that stretched flat in every direction. Jackson believed Deerfield could prove black Americans could prosper even in the most unforgiving landscape. For a time, they did. Then the Dust Bowl came. The topsoil blew away. The crops failed. The Great Depression crushed what the drought had not. Jackson himself stayed until his death, refusing to leave the town he had willed into existence. Today, a few crumbling structures stand on the open prairie, settling back into the soil. Just the wind and the quiet bones of a town that tried to grow where even the earth gave up. Number 1. Mound Bayou, Mississippi. Founded in 1887 by Isaiah Montgomery, a man who had been enslaved in the household of Jefferson Davis's brother, Mound Bayou was the most ambitious all-black town ever attempted in this country. Montgomery envisioned a self-sufficient black city rising from the Mississippi Delta, and for decades, that is exactly what it was. It had its own hospital, its own bank, its own cottonseed oil mill, and a civic pride that drew national attention. By the 1950s, the population was declining, but the institutions still held. The hospital still treated patients. The schools still graduated classes. Then, the same forces that hollowed out every other town on this list did their patient, grinding work. Economic isolation, out-migration, systemic neglect from a state government that was never comfortable with a black town that ran itself. Mound Bayou still exists. A small population holds on. And the question the town was built to answer, whether black Americans could build and sustain a city entirely on their own, was answered a long time ago. They could. They did. The rest of the country just never let it last. The first town on this list rose from Oklahoma prairie. This last one rose from Mississippi Delta mud. Both proved the same thing. Black Americans did not wait for this country to make room. They made their own. If your grandmother ever mentioned one of these names, now you know what became of it.